for looking at the difference of sort of paradigm, I guess you could say the lens by which we evaluate the reality around us, there's primary differences between uh, a carnivore diet, the psychopath diet, the people who have that, and vegans. So now, I can't speak for all vegans, but after listening to carnivores quite a lot, I can speak for some of them. I can see what their sort of mentality is, and this is one that came up. A guest on Asperage. He's talking about the circle of life and how that they're just a part of the circle of life, and vegans are just choosing to remove themselves from that. So, uh, I, I would say, oh, that's that's probably something that a lot of people who subscribe to this diet are going to agree with. I don't think I'm misrepresenting. If I am, go ahead and correct me. Uh, but I think that it's pretty accurate. Now, from my view, and I think a lot of vegans tend to look at it like this material realm is meaningless. The material realm isn't so meaningful. And the carnivores, they find this to be, this is everything to them. Uh, so what I see, and I think that a number of vegans might agree with this, is what the real the realist thing is consciousness, is sentience, is experience, and so and it's the most important thing, is the experience of conscious sentient creatures. That's sort of what we're looking at. No matter what uh, organism that consciousness, that sentience is inhabiting, it's important. The experience that it's having is important, and if it's having a particularly unpleasant experience, it's something that we should uh, endeavor to change, endeavor to improve, to make better for uh, that fractional uh, entity, that sort of lump of consciousness and sentience, that experiential being. We should endeavor to alleviate its suffering to some degree, and so uh, when you look at things through that lens, and you just realize, that maybe it's the case that it's all from the same source, that the only real, or the realist organism isn't organic at all, but rather, or perhaps it is, but it's consciousness. It's that behind the material world there is something greater. There is this sort of conscious uh, Medusa, or that's a kind of a there's a conscious consciousness and sentience, something that's able to have experience, is reaching in and filling up organisms in the material realm so that they can have that experience through the world around them. It's one monolithic sort of thing, and uh, and in that way, the experience, the conscious sentient experience that's had by a cat or a dog or a cow or a sheep or a pig or a human, there's no meaningful difference between any of these things. That they're all sort of shell being filled with that ability to experience that thing, that field of consciousness, so to speak. They're all being uh, sort of um, what's the word? Just filled with that consciousness. They're being filled up with that they're able to experience. And so when we're looking at uh, the progression of species, the movement of organisms forward in time, uh, it it makes sense to basically concern yourself with how everything is doing. Look around you. Is everything okay? Is there anything that's suffering unduly? And can you change that? Can you make it better? I mean, for me, the root of veganism really is that it's recognizing that on the bigger scale of looking at what existence is, that if anything can have an experience, there's a way to maximally improve that experience so that less suffering happens, so that uh, more joyful states are experienced, more joy is experienced, that we can bring forward some degree of uh, hedonic Shangri-La, not merely by and for the express purpose of hedonism, but rather so that we can move into even greater states of being, because the spiritual wealth of uh, causing suffering and harm it's degeneracy. That's what you get. You get spiritual degeneracy. I mean, the spirit behind anti-veganism is degenerate. It's very much promoting the idea that um, suffering doesn't matter, that harm is meaningless, that uh, basically they're spurning compassion and throwing justice to the wind. Their spirit is evil. It's very much this malevolent, nihilistic, apathetic sort of spirit that is its sole focus is to just increase suffering, to increase um, negative emotions and spiritual degeneracy uh, in the face of veganism and that spirit, in the spirit of compassion, and they do it for the sake of that, which is what makes it so psychopathic. It's what makes it clear that the opponents of veganism are sadists, and on a very sinister scale. I mean, because when we're talking about the spirit of veganism, I mean, it's not just the animals. I mean, as far as the spirit goes, it's not just factory farmed animals. I mean, the spirit of veganism reaches into everything, including humans. It reaches into those smaller organisms, and even as far as across the universe, across the entire universe, all organisms. The spirit of veganism has those in mind, compassion for them, wherever they may be. And so when you directly oppose that, it really shows sort of a moral evil, a character flaw so deep that it is irredeemable. Actually, it's irredeemable. It's irredeemable evil to directly oppose the vegan spirit, because it's a concern for all beings, and well, and even insofar as potentially a psychopath, because I can let's just summon a apparition here of a psychopath. That this thing, it can't feel empathy for me. It can't feel compassion for me. It wants to hurt me, but it itself can feel suffering and pain. Does that make me recognize it as a threat? Yeah. Does it make me want to torture it? No. Actually, no. Um, Remove? Yeah. Eventually, uh, in because a psychopath is basically a malformed human. It's someone who is probably an anti-vegan, and it's someone whose brain wiring is fucked up to the point where they just want to increase suffering and pain and harm, and they're a destructive, dangerous force for conscious creatures in general, and it's something that you should remove and destroy. And that's what autophagy is in the body too. I mean, every organism, including consciousness. Not that I even think it's likely psychopaths are conscious. I think that they actually don't have sentience or consciousness. They're more like a vegetable, probably, because they don't have those meaningful parts. But giving them the benefit of the doubt, even consciousness has to go through autophagy. There's because there's a randomness to everything, random mutations popping up, and some of those are going to move us forward. Like veganism, like the spirit of veganism is going to move us all forward in a positive direction, in a direction that's showing healing and concern for people, and a desire to bring joy and those things. Uh, while some might end up the 1% end up psychopathic, who just want to cause suffering and harm. And so, we should be removing these types of people eventually. And it's not really, it's not about banning farming, because right now it's just an issue of ill information, indoctrination, inception, and some degree of dependence on animal products at the moment. But over time, it's not going to even be about banning farming. It's actually going to be about reforming minds and uh, and removing psychopaths, because they don't really have a place ultimately in the future. I mean, these are people who are directly opposed to the well-being of conscious creatures, and it's important to recognize that that's a reality, that there are monsters. There absolutely are monsters among the human population, and it's just as important to understand that while we're moving forward with veganism, we keep in mind that there are monsters who actually should be destroyed as a form of conscious human autophagy. These are what ancients would sacrifice. Human sacrifice. Like, they're obviously a broken, twisted, unhumane, monstrous part of humanity that should be removed. And there's nothing actually controversial about that. When you really think about it, it by modern standards of confused and deranged morality, it's controversial. But again, much of modern deranged, confused, psychopathic morality has been heavily influenced by psychopaths who took positions of power and intentionally confused people to hide themselves among us. And it's important to recognize that. So, yeah, that's just my comments a little bit on the lens by which we're viewing the world around us. I mean, take your blinders off. Take your blinders off. Realize that there are people who are confused, but those people are different than the genuine monsters, okay? So, take your blinders off and recognize, we're not just facing ignorance, we're facing monsters and ignorance. Not that there's monsters everywhere. There's only 70 million of them on this planet, 75 million of them. So, and you know there's 7 billion people, so there's not that many, but they're out there. You know, notice that, and so take your blinders off. Be aware when you look around. You know, and begin to notice that your lens is different. You have a different lens than a lot of people, and the lens that we can take, we can choose to take any lens we want, right? But one of them is morally correct in this context. So, yeah, and you know, always keep in mind that nothing tastes better than good karma.